This is Pod Populi, podcasts for the people.
Well, good morning, Edgar. Welcome to the Born or Made podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I always try to ask where you're at, but I already know where you're at because we're in Boca today.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for all the humidity.
It's getting to be some pretty nice weather. Florida is getting a little bit better. The summer heat is coming off.
We've had a low of 49 at my house so far. I live in Virginia, and so we get like the premium weather kind of starting September, October. And then I will want to be in Florida come January. So I always like to ask, where were you born originally? Where are you from?
So I was born in Moscow, Russia.
Russia.
During communist times, right before the Soviet Union fell.
No kidding. And then how long were you there?
So I was there till I was 7 years old. I grew up with my mom initially, and then I actually moved to Canada to live with my dad.
So when you left, was it after the wall fell or before?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I left in 93, and that was a driving force. Of why I left, because that time there's a coup. And I don't know if you remember, but there was tanks in the streets of Moscow. They were firing on the parliament. Yeah. And that's when my mom kind of said, you know what, I think things are getting a little sketchy here. And she basically, my dad had been asking to have me come live with him in Canada for better opportunities and so on. And finally, my mom relented and said, you know what, I think you're right. He can go.
Okay, so how old are you when you left there?
7.
Okay, so you're 7 years old, and then what part of Canada did you go to?
Montreal.
Montreal. Okay, so you go from, are you in a small town in Russia? You said Moscow, but were you on the suburbs like Wade, or were you like in the city?
In the city, yeah. I was right by a metro station, so it's public transport everywhere. Lived in a high-rise or this kind of mid-rise that they built in the 70s. Density, yeah.
Okay, and then so you go to Montreal. Totally different environment, but you're in a big city. Were you still back in the big city, or did you get more rural?
Yeah, so the city feel didn't change. It was kind of the same. Yeah. Again, Montreal, public transportation everywhere. Didn't have a car. Walked, took the bus, metro, and so on. The biggest changes for me was obviously the language, because I had not spoken any French whatsoever. And
so you're 100% Russian.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
But my father's from Azerbaijan, which is used to be part of the Soviet Union. It's like this little country near Georgia and Armenia that now has a lot of oil and is doing pretty well. And my mom is Russian.
Is she still there?
She's still there.
No kidding. So you get there. So tell me what happens. You're this kid going to school. I guess you're in grade school, early grade school by American standards. You get to Montreal. Now you're going to school.
Right.
And you're a kid that can't speak any French.
Cannot.
So... man, what was that like? I mean, immersion, it says it works. Does it work?
It does, 100%. I mean, within a year, I was able to converse pretty fluently. And, kids, so what I learned actually later on is that kids before the age of around 12, 13 can learn languages like this. It's just so simple because the brain is still so moldable linguistically that if you put them in an immersion, not only will they speak well, but they most likely won't have a very heavy accent if they learn language before that critical age around 12, 13.
So I'm terrible with accents, but you have no Russian to me at all. Like Soviet, I don't know if is it Russian or Soviet?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you have zero.
That's exactly why. And I have friends that had come also from Russia or other countries, and they were, let's say, 14, 15, and they have a noticeable accent that they'll have for the rest of their life, even though their vocabulary and grammar is perfect, but it's something in the brain
your
changes.
vocabulary and grammar is perfect. You have a little tinge of something. I can't tell exactly, but it's not like, heavy or anything like that. And you can understand everything you're saying. Yeah. So you go Russian, then you're learning French, and they don't speak a lot of English.
So I went to a French school. And Montreal is heavily French speaking.
Right, correct.
But the schools are taught in French completely.
Really?
Yeah. And that's part of the system there. Now, they do have some English classes, but it would be English class maybe for an hour, a couple times a week, and that's it. The rest is everything's taught in French, math, science, so on, and every day you have French as a language.
So, I mean, you get off a plane, you're going in, I mean, what's it got to be? I mean, what is that feeling? I mean, you're a kid, you're scared, obviously, or nervous, whatever you want to call it at that point in your life. I mean, what's it feel like when you literally don't know how to ask how to go get food or get a taxi? Or, I mean, what does that feel like? I mean, is it...
It was strange. And in retrospect, I feel like kids actually adapt a lot better than you would think, because looking back at it now, I'm like, I can't believe I survived, really, because it was shocking. Now, of course, I had my father there. It wasn't like I was by myself. So, he was helping me. And then my stepmom, who was actually French, was also helping me learn at home. And both my dad and my stepmom were speaking French to me. So it definitely helped. But I remember the biggest thing for me actually was the food. So in Russia, we're used to very bland stuff like potatoes, sausages, a lot of grain, 𝗕cie and that kind of stuff. And we moved to Montreal, and it's a whole different type of food. And the toughest thing for me was actually my stomach adapting to that. And for the first 6 months, it was not good, let me tell you.
Really?
I had issues. And finally, and it was interesting because that was my first experience with nutrition and kind of like what you put in your body, how it matters so much. But at 7 years old, I realized how different food is in different countries that you wouldn't really expect.
No kidding. Yeah, all I was concentrating on was the dadgum language, and you're saying like, oh yeah, by the way, you got to figure out how to eat. I'm like, oh, small detail.
Yeah.
So you get kind of going through grade school, you get into high school, or you're still right there in Montreal, and then how does that go?
Right. So I actually, my father then got a job in the U.S. in Florida, in Palm Bay near Cape Canaveral.
Oh yeah.
And so we came down here. We only stayed a year. But that's when I started learning English, and I went to.
But you knew a little bit of English, just because you were getting
the French school.
Couple of days. But English is hard.
Well, English doesn't make sense. Like the pronunciation of certain words, like red and read.
Yeah.
And my biggest thing that still once in a while I mess it up is patio, because patio and ratio are literally the same. 4 letters, just start with a P or R.
That's right.
There's no logic to one being pronounced differently from the other. And English, to me, is one of the few languages where pronunciation doesn't make sense. And I think that's the etymology.
It literally, I've been watching stuff on videos, and they'll show like a word, and they'll be like, oh, that's bear, and then it's beer, and it's this, and you look, and all they do is change one letter, and it's not even remotely close to the same saying. Yeah. And that was kind of the first time I'm like, oh yeah, this is a jacked up. I mean, we have a terrible language.
Romance languages, French, Italian, Spanish, they tend to have more rules-based pronunciation and grammar because it comes from Latin, obviously. And so it's easier to learn in a way. In English, you kind of have to intuitively understand
over
it
and
somehow,
over again.
Yes.
Yeah, and I still haven't figured it out. I'm 61. So. Yeah. So you're down here in Florida, Cape Canaveral area. Yeah. And then so you're only here a year.
I'm only here a year. And I actually came down, and I was going to St. Joseph's Catholic High School. School.
Okay.
And that was because in Cape Canaveral area, the public schools are terrible. Like there was literally just multiple stabbings a year in the middle school. So my dad was like, yeah, you're going to private school because we want you to be safe. And I went to school there, and they made me skip a grade. And it was a bit strange because they're like, well, your math is very, from 6th to 8th. And they said, your math and science is very advanced. You don't really speak English that well, but we're sure you're going to figure it out. So we're just going to make you skip a grade. And I did. So that was another experience.
That's a big deal. I remember one kid of ours when I was a little boy, he skipped a grade and he never really recovered. mainly the physical and mental side, because he was always smaller, super smart, was never an issue. Did you have any like big, because I mean, 6th grade to 8th grade, structurally as a human, that is a huge gap.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, that was a big challenge too, because now you have the language, you also have the maturity level.
Absolutely.
Right, as a kid. Where academically, I didn't have any issues. I felt very comfortable with that. And by then, the English started to really come in again with full immersion. But yeah, I mean, even later through high school, it wasn't really until I got to college to where it didn't really matter anymore. But through high school, definitely, I was on the smaller side as a kid. I was always very skinny. So, and I didn't really hit like a growth spurt until sort of later in high school. And on top of that, my birthday's in June.
Yeah, you're like me, so you were always behind.
Yeah, so I didn't even get my driver's license in high school until senior year of high school.
No kidding. Yeah, because I graduated high school. I was 17.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So you're down here. So you're done your year here in Florida.
Yeah.
Now where are you going?
Then my dad gets another job in McLean, Virginia.
Okay,
so
Northern
I went
Virginia.
to McLean High School.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Know exactly where that is.
Yeah, Highlanders.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So you
spent 4 years there.
So you're 4 years there. So you get done. You're thinking. Did you do any sports in high school? Or anything?
I did. I played tennis.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you enjoyed that?
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't at a level where I was, competing in big tournaments, but I played enough to, keep myself occupied.
Great
stay out of trouble.
athletes, man. I was watching. I don't watch a lot of tennis, but the U.S. Open comes every year, and I kind of tend to watch that. Dude, those guys hit the ball hard.
And they're fast.
So fast. Their speed. I don't know what they call it. They'll do the quick snap, and the amount of speed, and you watch it in full, real time.
Yeah,
it's unfreaking.
Or how much court they cover from side to side is fascinating because
and they slide, and then they just do that little tink, and then the ball goes across, and then they get. I mean, yeah. Some of those guys. I think there's one guy out there right now. I don't remember anyway. They were talking about just how fast he was. Yeah. And there was one where he got a deep shot across and he had to run to the front of the court.
Right.
And you're like, wow, that guy's that was legit. And he reversed. I mean, he was going this way, reversed, went back, and then did a backhand. I mean, you're covering from really one extreme to the other, and you're covering length on your arms. Yeah, I was like.
I always wondered if you take tennis guys and football guys and soccer guys and have them compete in different physical challenges, who would be faster or at certain things.
Yeah, it would be hard to say.
Yeah.
What you would find out is they would all be better than the average person at anything.
For sure.
You see that. I mean, especially some of these NFL guys, you see that are 300 pounds and they're running sub 5 race, and you're just like, that's a lot of mass.
That much body moving that fast is scary.
Yeah.
Especially when it hits you afterwards.
Yeah, you don't want to. You don't want to find out what those forces are. So you get out of high school. You're going to go to college at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So in high school, my plan was I liked biotech. That was kind of my thing. I had a friend of my father's that was working in biotech, and I was super fascinated by it. At that time, there was the race to map the human genome. And actually, Craig Venter was based in Maryland, right? Kind of across the river.
So what year are we at now?
So 98, I started high school, graduated in 2002.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Because Geno was a big deal. People think we take that for granted. We didn't even know what that was in 2000. We hadn't cracked it yet, right? Because I think the Clinton administration actually dumped all that money, and people were kind of like, why are we doing this? Yeah. And then how hard it was. So you're doing that. So you're going to college.
I'm and I'm sort of interested in that. And that was my goal when I went to college, is to study that. I hadn't really thought about, practicing medicine or anything like that. I wanted to do biotech. And then I got into my first year doing all the kind of basic science classes.
Where were you going to college at?
University of Virginia.
Okay, so, great.
Yeah, just like
UVA.
Yeah, man. Just like most people from Northern Virginia, that's where we end up.
Yeah.
But funny enough, I applied to UVA, and all the Ivy League schools didn't get into single Ivy League and went to UVA.
Yeah, but
so UVA was my safety, but it was also
medical. It's
great.
Yeah, you did well.
Yeah, no, I had a great time there. And after first year, I had looked at studying abroad, maybe later, and my father actually encouraged me to do it right away. And he said, you know what, go do it your sophomore year, because this is the time to do it when you're young, when you have less responsibilities, and you can figure out your major and all that stuff later. And so second year of college, I go to France for 12 months. Usually people do a semester. I decided to just stick it out there and went to Lyon. Went to study at it's IEP, which is their political school, actually. So nothing to do with biotech, but it was just very interesting to learn kind of the politics and the government. Obviously, European Union, big at the time, kind of forming and coalescing, and just loved it, because it was like, people backpack through Europe for a month.
Yeah.
I basically got to do that for 12 months.
Yeah, and at this point, you're what, 20-ish?
No. So that was 2003. So I'm 18. Yeah.
Wow.
18. 18. Showed up in France a month after my birthday, and stayed until I was 19.
No kidding. So tell me, so you're doing political, or would you say through
political science?
Yeah. So political science, that has nothing to do with medical.
Not at all. And I was a little bit worried, like, okay, well, what am I going to do with my major and stuff? But
And how does that transfer when you're in a U.S. university.
Yeah.
You're going over there. Now you're doing something different. Does it transfer back, or you got to take extra classes?
UVA actually has a relationship with that school.
Yeah, okay.
And that's the study abroad program. So you go there, all the classes are pass-fail, which is really great if you're trying to enjoy Europe because you don't have to worry about grades.
All you gotta do is
and
pass.
they don't really ever fail the foreign students. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I was for a short time I was a bartender.
Okay,
and I loved
let's
it.
talk about this. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it was actually an American bar, and I was there a couple times with friends, and I'm like, you know what? I would love to work here because it was just a fun place.
Sure.
Great
You're
music.
18.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And so I worked as a bartender, and it was fun, but the bar closed at 3 a.m. So everybody was kind of chilling for about 30 minutes. Then you started cleaning. So around 5:30, everybody's done cleaning, ready to go home, and everybody will have like a beer, sit around, have a beer before you go home. So by the time I get home, it's like 6 a.m. and my 9 a.m. class was not looking very good.
At all.
So I did that for about a month, and I said, look, they may not usually fail the foreign students, but I'm pushing the limits here. I better shape up. And then so I quit that job and kind of went back to really studying. But all the credits transfer. So what was interesting is that I basically finished my major, which I chose to be French language and literature, in 1 year because I took so many credits towards that major, plus a few classes freshman year and sophomore year. So I was done with the major. And then when I came back, my junior and senior year, I took all of the required classes for dental school. So that's all the advanced biology, advanced chemistry, biochemistry, and so on.
So you went into dental. So you go bio, go to dental.
Yeah.
All right. So
then University of Maryland is where I ended up.
Yep.
I actually applied to a bunch of different schools, and I chose Maryland because they had heavily invested in technology at the time, and that's what I was really interested in. So,
because your bio kind of makes you want to understand the cutting edge stuff.
Exactly. So they were the first school to implement computer designed implant and crown restorations. They're also the first school to have a cone beam scan, which is like a 3D version or image of your face and mouth, so that you can more precisely place multiple implants and do things that were much harder before.
Can they do that in office, or do you have to go to a facility to do that?
Yes,
scan?
you can do it in the office these days. So in a private practice, and I had that actually in my private practice. So I had a CT, I had all the digital. We would make the crowns in one visit, which was really cool because I don't know if you ever had an experience getting a crown.
No, I've never had a cavity.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good. But that's what attracted me to Maryland. So I was there for 4 years, and then I focused on surgical training because I wanted to really do the actual surgeries, placing implants,
and it's more
bone.
cutting edge, right? I mean, cleaning teeth, you're going to clean teeth the same way. But now you're doing, because there's new stuff's going to come in. Think about, we didn't even know what a 3D printer was back then. I mean, all the stuff obviously has changed. So did you stay in Maryland when you got out of college, or where did you go from there to start your practice and stuff?
So from dental school, I did, it kind of was a residency type program, and it was in West Virginia. Okay. So it was called Romney, West Virginia, a town of 2,000 people. The whole county had about 20,000 people.
Everything's rural.
Small town. Yeah. And that was a big change for me because I've actually never lived in a place like that before. Moscow, big city, Montreal, big city, So going to West Virginia was a bit strange, but I loved it there. Just in terms of the practice that I was in and the mentorship that I got. And I got to do so many procedures and see so many patients that for most of my colleagues, when they got out of school, they worked for someone for many years, like at least a couple, but usually
and
5 or more.
Probably went to major metroplexes most likely because that was the biggest source.
Yeah, exactly. And part of it was for them, they were building up their own confidence and skill level. Whereas for me, after that year, I was ready to go. I felt super comfortable doing all the procedures that I wanted to do, and I was ready to get into my own private practice.
Why did you go there? I mean, was that a personal, did you decide to go there? I mean, it's just what worked? I mean, that's because that is really odd.
Yeah. So part of the reason was exactly the fact that I was going to be exposed to way more procedures than you would normally in a typical private practice.
That was smart.
And that's what tends to happen, right? So let's say you're a doctor and you're bringing an associate on, you don't throw them the big stuff right away.
Right, you're doing
kind of want to test them out, and you're doing usually the bigger procedures, and then they start off with the smaller stuff, and they get their skills up to a certain level. But there's such a need in West Virginia because it was very underserved. There was very few surgeons there that they were just happy. And they also pay you a lot more money when you go into an area like that because they need you to come there. So I was making probably twice as much as all of my friends that I graduated with.
And it cost half as much to live there.
Yeah, I think I was paying, my rent was like $800 a month.
Yeah.
And it was the nicest place that I could find.
Do that in McLean.
Yeah.
Yeah, not happening.
Maybe a closet somewhere.
Yeah, now for sure. Yeah, you wouldn't have anything close.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're West Virginia. You put your time in there. You're a year. Where are we going now?
So then I bought a practice. I had met a girl in dental school.
Okay.
And she also actually came out there and worked at a different practice. But we had planned to open a practice together.
Okay.
So we ended up buying a practice in
existing practice. Okay.
Small, older doctor that was on his way out.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was also kind of one of the things that I wanted to do is either start a practice or buy a practice that I knew I could grow. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of opportunities that you have, but if you buy into a practice already large, there's not a lot of value add. So you're buying into a mothership, right? Like a multi-specialty practice.
Probably not going to expand it.
Exactly.
Right.
And I knew that by bringing those procedures that I learned how to do, that I was passionate about, all the surgical stuff, I could take a practice that was smaller and grow it significantly, which obviously creates value, creates equity, right? And so that's what we ended up doing. We bought a practice in Bel Air in a small existing space. Ended up then buying a building, a freestanding building that had the whole top floor was 10,000 square feet. That became our practice. And there was another 10,000 underneath that was rented out to a couple of different offices and whatnot.
So you had owner-occupied real estate.
Owner-occupied real estate. Best thing you can do.
That's right. Banks love that.
Love that. In fact, I remember we got a loan from Wells Fargo for 20 years, fully amortizing at like 4.35%.
Yeah, they don't normally make you put down as much. I have two buildings that I own like that, owner occupied, and it's just different.
They like it because they know it's usually stable.
Yeah, that's right.
Except I'll tell you obviously a little bit later the rest of the story, but that was initially, and so it was high-end practice. We built a digital sign in front that was running advertisements. It was across from the main shopping center in that area, so tons of traffic coming by, like 20, 30,000 cars. Seeing our sign. And so the practice just grew tremendously. And it was doing very, very well.
So how long are you running this practice? It's 10,000 feet. That's a big dentist office.
Yeah. So we had the surgical part, and then my business partner, also a romantic partner at the time, had a med spa side. And so she was kind of more passionate about cosmetic type of things. So she was doing Botox fillers. Yep. She was doing laser treatments. She had a couple of estheticians working there as well.
And what year is this now?
So we built that building around 2013.
Okay.
We actually bought an existing building that was vacant and got a great deal on it, and then renovated the whole inside into the into the dental practice and the med spa side.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So we're doing this 2013. So where are we going? So we're gonna.
Yeah. So then things turn a little bit south for me because in 2017, I get into a car accident in January and injure my shoulder. So I was actually just driving down the street in DC, M Street, if you're familiar with it.
Oh yeah.
And I was at the part where there was parked cars on the right. An Uber driver kind of pulled right out of a parking spot. And then on the left side of me, there was cars. So I couldn't do anything other than hit the brakes. And I slowed down. I wasn't going that fast anyway. So I slowed down, but I still rear-ended him. And my right hand was on the steering wheel. So when the airbag deployed, it pushed my shoulder back, and I got a posterior dislocation with a labral tear, which is actually an injury that's common in offensive linemen in the NFL because they're always blocking with their hands up, so they get that force backwards, like we were talking about 300 pounds of D linemen coming the other way, and posterior dislocation is very unique because it tends to not be as painful initially, but creates more damage. And so for me, at first, I didn't think that it was that bad. I actually thought it was just a sprain. So I made the mistake, and this is probably common with a lot of doctors, like, well, you know what? It's okay. I'll just take some ibuprofen, let it rest.
So you don't even
ice.
go to the hospital? You just like, I'm good.
I just thought it was okay. It was kind of a low-speed accident. I didn't feel like I was really that shaken up. I mean, I also had my fingers were sore, and that turned out to be a valgus ligaments there. But for my shoulder, I was like, okay, it'll heal.
Yeah.
Well, a week passes by, it's still bothering me. A couple more weeks, and I can tell that. I mean, I'm having to take days off now because it's just getting worse and worse.
Getting worse.
And then it turned out that I had an MRI and an X-ray. Turns out that this is really damaged. And the other thing is that when you have these tears, there aren't always repairable. So certain things are repairable, and others, going in there to do surgery, it doesn't always work as well as you would expect. Of course, yeah. So I ended up going to HSS in New York, kind of one of the top orthopedic hospitals. The guy I went to, you go into his office, he's got 30 pictures of NBA players, NFL players.
Yeah,
so he does his kind of injuries.
Stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and he says, look, we can do a few things here, but I don't know if we can get back to 100%. You can get to maybe 70%. So you can have.
So when you say 70% of movement or
movement, and
I mean, are you like limited to like you can't lift?
Yeah.
Or are you getting shaking in your arm?
All of that, or just random pains? And at the end of the day, we're able to the tear started healing, but created a lot of scar tissue. And I've always had constant inflammation there, no matter.
I assume you're right-handed.
Yeah.
So double whammy.
Yeah.
Wasn't like you were left-handed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of need both hands for surgery anyway.
But I mean, you could kind of, but yeah.
I don't know if I would want to try to.
No, I'd be like,
one hand. And the biggest thing for me is that, doing these long surgeries, you can't stop in between. So if you all of a sudden you're in pain,
that's a problem.
That's a problem.
That's right.
And that was what I was doing. So it started to become clear that this was probably not going to heal to the point where I could return to full-time practice.
So this is career ending.
Yeah. And that was tough at first because, I'd studied for a while to do this. I had this whole practice going, and
yeah, you're young. I mean, you're bulletproof at this point in your mind.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
I was early 30s, right?
Yeah.
So I think I'm invincible, and it was kind of a shock. And then things started really going downhill because by that time, me and my partner were no longer in a romantic relationship. Yep. But she was still sort of benefiting from the fact that we, stupidly on my part, didn't have operating agreements. Because when we bought the practice, we were together, everything was fine.
Yeah, you think, right, yeah. You don't know what you don't know. You think everything's going to be this way forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that point, especially once I was injured, this became an issue, right? And so I was trying to figure out what I can do. I actually wanted to sell my half of the practice, and she didn't want me to sell it. But then also, I wasn't practicing, so the income of the practice started going down. Yep. And eventually we were at such odds that I basically couldn't do anything, and I just walked away. Just completely walked away. Said, look, there's nothing I can really do here. And she ended up on her own driving the practice into the ground.
But are you still on the personal guarantee for the bank?
Yeah. Yeah. So and the building also had the mortgage, obviously.
Yep.
Building now was probably worth about 1.5, 1.6 million. Sold for $700,000 at auction, foreclosure auction.
Yep.
But that did pay off the loan because we actually got a good deal initially on it.
A lot of people don't end up in that good a spot.
Yeah.
So listen to this, people. Operating agreements.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And buy sells.
Absolutely. And that's, one of the biggest mistakes I think I've made, and actually made it again later on, but is I think when we're doing business with friends, at least from my perspective, for me, you kind of know that you need to put everything out there and set the expectations to not affect the friendship. And so I've never had issues doing business with friends because it just naturally to me, I'm like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to write this up. This is your responsibility. This is mine. And so I've always had that, but it's those romantic partners where if you happen to be in business with your girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, husband, a lot of times you're kind of sharing things already, especially if it's a serious relationship. Absolutely. Or you're married. So you don't think about, okay, well, we really need to preserve sort of this separation of church and state, right? And the problem with that is when it hits with friendships, you can ruin the friendship, but oftentimes I think people still deal with it rationally. Well, when you're in a romantic relationship and that breaks apart, rationality goes out the window.
Out the window. That's right.
And if you don't have the proper protections, you don't have operating agreements, it can create big, big problems. And I learned that first time. I did learn it again with my ex-wife, actually. And but third time, I'm not making those mistakes. So that's the lesson that I've learned.
I was so fortunate. The first business I ever started, I got into partnership with a guy. And we have to have an operating agreement. I didn't even really know what that meant, right?
Right.
And I said, so explain this to me. And he said, here's what you need to always, and this, I'm going to tell you this because this is the way it was taught to me. He had a wife, I had a wife. He goes, look, if something happens to you, I don't want to deal with her.
Right.
And if something happens to me, I don't want you dealing with my wife.
Right.
That was the analogy he used for me. And so for me, I've just everything I do in these partnerships now is always like, I think about not me and you, because you and I are going to be able to figure it out. Right. Most likely it's the other person. Because if you're married, they may not, you and I may own 50%, but you die, she owns 50%. Yeah. And that's what and so now for me, he taught me that, and I was like, okay, so everything I do, and most people do figure it out the hard way. Yeah. I got very fortunate that. Yeah. Wow. So building cells, where are we going now? What are you doing?
Yeah. So then I moved up to New York. That's actually where I met my ex-wife, and I'm thinking, okay, career change. What can I do? I always had a passion for technology and data. And in fact, when I was in dental school, I started a small company that did demographics research for doctors to help them find a location and actually estimate the amount of revenue that they could make. And the model that I built was so good that I was being hired by private equity firms from New York that were looking at buying these large chains of dental practice or medical practices.
Yeah, because they're big time mergers. I mean, they're buying up everything.
Big roll-ups that they were doing.
Roll-ups, that's right.
And they wanted me to evaluate the location as well as the proposed locations that this chain was operating. And I remember it was actually Aspen Dental, where they had something like almost 700 locations. And just by my demographics model, I was able to estimate the revenue of the whole company within like 5%. And those numbers weren't public. So these private equity guys were looking at my model and they were shocked because like, how can you know how much these guys are making just for demographics? But it was that accurate. But that small company I ended up selling because I couldn't really run it and be in private practice at the same time. Small exit, didn't make much money from it, but sold it to a dental kind of distributor that did absolutely nothing with IP. It just disappeared. But I had a passion for that, and so I knew that I wanted to do something with technology and data. At first, I was working more on the fintech side of things in New York because I had a couple connections through those private equity guys that I talked to. So I built some projects with blockchain. I did some of that. Actually ended up starting a company with my ex-wife. Again, same mistake. Of course, I was married, so I was like, all right, well, this time it's, that was my thought. Well, last time I wasn't married, and this time I'm in love.
Sure.
It's going to last forever. Right. So did that. But as I was working on that company as well, my goal ultimately was to build things for the healthcare industry because I knew I had that experience.
Yeah, sure.
And a passion for the
credibility.
Data. Yeah, and that the two could really come together. And so around 2022, I started Phoenix Data Solutions, which is basically a consulting company that builds data type solutions for the healthcare industry. And right around that time, I was also starting to really get into the machine learning AI side of things. Because one of the things I recognized is, in medicine, we have this huge amount of data, but nobody really looks at it. in the sense that there's not a lot of tools to analyze it on a large scale.
Because it's still somewhat fragmented, right? We think it's not, but it really is, right?
Very fragmented. A lot of the systems don't talk to each other very well.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom.
And the other thing, there's intentional fragmentation because of HIPAA, which prevents the sharing of full patient data.
That's right.
You know, like if you want to train an AI model to recognize cats and dogs, there's millions of pictures of cats and dogs. If you want to train it to recognize a certain type of cancer, there's not really that data out there unless it's from a specific hospital, and that hospital is not going to let you train on their data and then use it somewhere else.
Because everybody's trying to protect.
Yeah.
And did they hide around HIPAA?
They do. That's the easy way to say.
Block
and
it.
There are ways around it, like you can anonymize patient data.
Let's say, because you wouldn't know. Yeah. I mean, if I had cancer, and as long as you know who it is, you wouldn't know if they're.
Yeah, exactly.
5 foot, 4 foot, 10 foot. I mean,
if you take out the basic data like name, address, phone number, email, and even something like location, zip code.
Yeah, I mean, really, you just need, sex to understand. If you're dealing with women or men.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, nobody really cares.
Yeah,
no kidding.
Yeah.
So they hide around the HIPAA. Yeah, HIPAA drives me crazy.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and so that's why currently my company basically does consulting and one-off projects. I haven't really found yet a particular product that I want to take and scale to the whole industry. And part of the reason was because the projects that I've done, they're limited to that particular client. So it might be a hospital group or a physician's group. And their part of our deal is that I can't use that data that they provide me to train a model that I can use somewhere else.
So you almost have to get to a big hospital corporation.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's some big ones, but there's really none that have like 100, right? Or do they? I don't.
Yeah, no, like HCA.
Yeah, I know HCA is like huge.
Yeah, that's a big one. Some of the other systems I've gotten, because there's so much consolidation in the industry as well.
On that one, too.
So yeah,
but that's even controlled on how they consolidate, right? Because they can't have monopolies and there's all kinds of stuff.
So one of the things I'm kind of working on now is creating a subsidiary in Europe, because, for example, in England, it's all NHS, National Health Service, and they have all the data from everybody.
Because it's government.
Because it's government.
Okay, all right.
And so if now you can be in a position where you have access to all that data, and because it's government, they may be a little bit more willing to let you then train on that data and use it somewhere else.
Because there's no competition.
Correct.
But do they have HIPAA there?
They do, but again, you can anonymize patient data, right? So you can get around.
They're more comfortable because they control it all anyway. So they just do one click. It takes the whole system in play, and everybody complies.
Correct. But then the other side of that is it's a huge government bureaucracy, and it's very difficult to deal with to any sort of decision maker. That's the challenge.
No kidding.
But and so in terms of the education on the AI side, I actually ended up doing a postgraduate program at Stanford School of Engineering in AI, because I wanted to get I was learning some of it on my own and coding, which I kind of knew a little bit from before, but I wanted to have solid foundational knowledge and really have the theory and not just the practical application. So I did that program, finished that actually earlier this year. And also,
so you can write code?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, Python.
You are smart.
Yeah,
I knew I could tell
you me that. I don't know.
No, you are, because we did some fun stuff in our office about 5 years ago. People I'm old, right? So I just do an app. Oh, I'm going to do this, and I just and you just to put in your email address, write code for that is hard. There's a lot of stuff in there, and you take all this stuff. The average person operating these, I'm talking about apps. The amount of coding in that is so amazing.
Yeah. It's gotten easier because there's a lot of tools and packages that automate certain functions.
I've heard that. And you're getting more to how many code, used to, there was 100 back when they were doing zeros and ones. And then I heard there was a lot of overlap because you're writing in Python, and then what's another big one?
JavaScript, C++.
But they don't necessarily talk, right?
Right. No. Yeah,
so that's the other thing. So then
you have to translate them.
Are we getting down to 4, 5, 6 at this point? Or are we still?
Yeah, I would say that's true. So in what I do, Python is 99%.
Okay.
Because Python is the coding language of data science, AI, and machine learning. So almost all of the things that are using AI run on Python, because
that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you can take other languages to build front facing applications that kind of interact with this Python backend. But I don't even really do that. I have a team that...
but you have to understand it. So that's good that you understand. Otherwise, you can't manage it.
Yeah. And the thing about coding is that it just makes sense. Like in medicine, you can do a great job and the outcome's still unpredictable because it depends on patient factors and things outside of your control. Whereas with code, if you wrote it correctly, it's going to do the same thing every time.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually.
And you can do trial and error, right? You can
and nobody dies.
Nobody dies. So you have, it's a little
small difference. Yeah.
It's a little less pressure. I mean, obviously when you push it to production into a real scenario, but by then you've tested it on millions of
nobody
times.
died.
Nobody died.
Yeah, you don't have to use, you don't have to use small animals.
Yeah, no, that's true.
No kidding. So that's where you're at now.
Yeah.
So you're doing all that. So you actually got that in AI.
Yeah.
So you're on kind of and you're in pretty early. I mean, everybody's thinking the train's left the station, but this thing.
We're still very early.
We don't even know, right?
Yeah,
what
it can do.
No freaking clue.
Yeah. And especially in medicine, because in medicine, again, you have this data silo issue where there's not a lot of data sets or things that you can train AI on. So everybody's building their own little things kind of on the side, and at some point it's going to somehow come to the surface and integrate, and it's going to be fascinating. But in medicine, the traditional way of doing even like medical studies, for example, is you take a hypothesis like, okay, African American males over the age of 40 are more likely to get heart disease. And you're testing that one little factor with that group and a control group. And then you do other studies. When we look at, for example, supplements and vitamins, you see those studies, but they're very limited in scope. And now with big data and AI, you can take this huge amount of data and find patterns that you never would have found doing traditional medical research.
And it's accurate?
It can be very accurate. So I'll give you an example. One project we worked on actually detected the risk of breast cancer without mammograms, just from patient factors. And because one of the issues is, women after a certain age are recommended to get a mammogram every year, but they usually don't because it's not very comfortable and they have to schedule their appointments. So this actually, without genetic testing and without the mammogram, can estimate the risk of breast cancer to such high level that then the doctor can say, look, based on this AI tool, you're at very high risk. So you do need to get the mammogram. And if the doctor tells you that, you're going to say, okay, I do want to go. If they just tell you, hey, you're over 40, so you should get it every year.
Right. Oh,
people don't.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
They're not going to be compliant with that. So just fascinating
that can
tools.
drive down cost.
Absolutely.
Greatly.
Right. Well, that's another thing, right? And so one of the things is, I think in the U.S., insurance companies are going to be a certain driver for some of the AI applications, because right now they're still not really... They're using AI for fraud detection, which we built some projects with that. But in terms of treatment modalities, they're going to drive some of that because there's absolutely a cost savings where maybe not everybody needs the same diagnostic test, or certain people need a more expensive diagnostic test that you can't give to everybody, but because you're selecting that patient population because of their high risk, you're doing the diagnostic test earlier and treating the disease earlier, getting better outcomes, and you're not spending as much money treating the symptoms down the road.
Yeah, because now they're just like, hey, did your mom and dad have high blood pressure?
Right.
Yes. Did your parents anybody have a heart? I mean, you have these same 10 questions and they determine if you're high risk or not.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you could get, me and you are brothers, and you may get freaking, colon cancer, and I may have a heart attack.
Yeah, exactly.
But so there's nothing, but now with AI, they may be able to start determining, because you're structurally taller and a little bit thinner, I'm shorter, stockier, I may have more problems with that. So.
Yeah. Or like COVID, I think COVID made people really understand, in terms of general population, how diseases are very variable, because there's some people got it that were apparently healthy and died, and other people, I was living in a country club community at the time, and there was a gentleman who was 92 years old, got it, was sick for 3 days, was totally fine.
And then you take, like Cheryl and I, we both get it. We're mid-50s at the time. Mm-hmm. We lost our taste and smell.
Yeah.
And we tested. I mean, we had COVID, but we were both healthy. Yeah. Our parents all got it. Everybody was fine. We had that genetic that literally she and I've had it several times. And the worst thing we typically do, both of us have gotten sick once.
Right.
But most of the time we just lose our taste and smell, and we never really get sick.
Exactly.
We were both tired, and that was because we were moving. And we literally, Cheryl's like, I can't taste anything.
Right.
I'm like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
He's like, I can't smell. So then I'm like, you'll be fine. I get it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die. I thought I was going to die.
Yeah.
And it took us about 90 days.
Yeah. But
That's
I think
crazy
that
when
put
you
the
think
sort of
about it.
disease specificity out into the forefront. And look, I think we are going to have at some point other widespread diseases. And I think, or at least I hope, that people have realized that this sort of like buckshot approach to dealing with it is not the right way. You have to really look at the data, figure out what's making certain people very sick, what's making others. So, I mean, today, if we got another pandemic, I think people are not going to. They're not going to lockdown.
No,
they're just not. But at the same time, you still need to do certain things to prevent the spread. But you have to be more intelligent about it, and that's why I think AI and machine learning, big data, all this stuff. These are interchangeable terms because people they actually have different meanings. Yes. But we're not going into the technical stuff here. But I think it's going to be very important, and people will want to have more understanding of medicine, of diseases, to get better outcomes and also preserve quality of life, so that we're not going into widespread lockdowns again, for 6 months or whatever.
Yeah, most of the guys I know now, we talk about it. I was fortunate. I was business. It was a necessity. But if they came in and told me to lock down, I'm like, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to do it.
Right.
I mean, I'm going to move on. I may die, but I'm not going to do what they did last time.
Right.
And that's for a whole nother topic. So, but wow, we've gone fast.
Yeah.
So, two things. One, how's your shoulder now?
It's, it doesn't hurt every day, but I still have limited range of motion. Like if I'm at the gym, I can't do certain exercises. I can't do shoulder press.
Yeah, I can tell
side.
you look like shit. Yeah. You don't even look like you work out. You're all like jacked up. You walk out, I'm like, geez, okay.
I try to stay healthy. Yeah, you're healthy, nutrition as well.
Yeah.
But I can't do like wide angle bench. I can't really do a raise. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and it's hurting. Right. And so I do take peptides and other anti-inflammatory things to try to keep it. But there's permanent scar tissue there that's just not going away. And I talked to multiple orthopedists, said, look, we can go in there, clean that scar tissue out, but that never really works because it comes back. Like you can't remove scar tissue and expect it to not come back because that surgery creates more scar tissue. So it's just sort of a cycle.
Yeah. Okay.
So I keep it maintained. Keep it maintained so I can do everyday tasks, but I'm not ever really going back to surgical practice. And the other thing is I actually got rear-ended a month ago and I just had an MRI of my neck.
Oh no.
And I have bulging discs and all kinds of stuff there. So yeah, I'm
not riding in the car with you, by the way, so don't ask me.
Yeah, and that time I was stopped at a stoplight on Yamato. I was just sitting there and a guy comes flying, hits me. Yeah.
So are you living in Florida now?
I am. Yeah.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, I live in Delray.
Because you moved down here kind of pre-COVID or right during COVID?
Right around COVID, yeah. Okay. So we moved down in 2020, bought a house.
Were you bailing because of COVID? Or were you on lockdown?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, okay. A lot of people did. I mean, there were
yeah. So we were living in New York, and New York was very much locked down. We started kind of living in Charleston for a little bit, but Charleston's very homogeneous, like very southern, and having grown up in just such a multicultural environment, it was a little tough for me because it's kind of boring. Mm-hmm. I love the town. Like I love going there for a little vacation, but to live there full time. And I also wanted my daughter to be exposed to a little bit more diversity in general, just languages, cultures, that kind of stuff. So I'm in Delray. I'm living here with my daughter, who's 5 now, just started kindergarten.
Great age.
Yeah, so much fun. She's great.
Well, we've got to end with my, one final question is, after going through your story at this point in your life is, do you think you were born or do you think you were made?
Born, and I think part of the reason is that I've really never worked for anybody else in my life since my last real W-2 job was I worked at Circuit City when I was in high school and for a summer during college.
Yeah, okay.
And that was my
back when they had employees.
Yeah, exactly. And that was my last job. Everything else, I've always been entrepreneurial, and I don't know where that drive necessarily comes from because my father's a very intelligent man, an electrical engineer. Never was, tried to do a little business stuff, but never was very successful in it. But for me, I always, I think part of it is control. Like I like to be in charge of my own destiny.
Yeah.
The other part is not being afraid of failure. And I've had multiple failures in different ways. Yeah. Had to restart several times, but it doesn't really scare me because I just have this sort of innate feeling like it's going to be okay. Part of it is just my spirituality as well, you know, and so there's a lot of these driving forces that tell me, like, just take the risk, you know, it'll be fine, you know. Don't do anything that's going to land you in jail, but other than that, take those entrepreneurial risks, and I think good things come out of that. So I've definitely had that streak in me forever, and I don't really see myself going to work, you know, some big corporate firm ever again. I'm just going to keep pushing my thing.
That's a great answer. That'll inspire a lot of people. Well, good. So the next one, you're going to be the first one I'm going to ask you this. So will you come back? Because you're close.
Would love to.
And you won't have to answer the born or made, but let's talk about nutrition.
Would love to.
We talked about my couple of things I was showing you out here before we started this. I'd like to really dive into that. I'm starting to kind of get into that myself even more. I've always been kind of athletic, but just really starting to I'm trying to get off blood pressure medicine, things like that. You know, I don't want to be part of the complex of, you know, here's the medicine. You got to take this for the next 20 years. Yeah. And I think our generation, because I'm older than you, but you got the advantage, but we're living longer and healthier, older. Right. And now we're like, I don't think I want to do this the rest of my life. So
absolutely.
You'll do that?
Absolutely. Would love to. I've been passionate about nutrition and fitness and the science of it as well for years now. And I always approach it from, you know, my medical training as well.
That's why I was saying you got kind of combo,
and understanding, just really doing a deep dive into it. But I think it's really important because on one hand, today we have so much more opportunities for better nutrition and supplements and so on.
And just information for the common person.
Right.
Not just guys like you that are, I've got access. Anybody can get this information for the most part.
Exactly.
Not always accurate.
But on the other hand, we also have much worse food than we used to have, I think, you know, 50 years ago or whatever, right? Yes. There's so many bad options, and you just have to figure out what can you do. But I do believe that there's a lot of simple things that people can do to make their lives healthier. And there's also more complex things with supplements, peptides, and so on that is also very valuable for those that are kind of like pushing themselves to live the best and healthiest life they can. So awesome. Love to talk about it. Absolutely.
All right, that'll be exciting. Well, thanks for being on the Born or Made podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.